In this video, we're going to talk about every election, what happened in the legislative elections, because I think that it can be somewhat interesting to see, how Republicans have more chambers than Democrats, but Democrats have really been improving recently. 2024, the Republicans gained control of the Michigan House of Representatives. Before, they were in a 56-54 minority, and then they regained a 58-52 majority. Minnesota was a weird one because beforehand, Democrats had a 70-64 majority, and then it went to a 67-67 split. But then you had this whole invalidation thing, so it was temporarily 67-66. Yada, yada, yada. It was a big story. And this came, with Trump's victory, but Republicans barely made any gains, in this. And another underrated result that I want to point out is Vermont, where Republicans didn't flip by the chamber, but they broke through the supermajorities in both the Senate and the House in Vermont. And this is important based on the results of the gubernatorial election in Vermont. Phil Scott smashed the Democrats in that race, winning by 51.6%. So because there was a Republican governor in Vermont, this means that now that there's no longer a supermajority, his vetoes have more effect, effectively making Vermont's government now a split government, where technically before it really wasn't. But really, in a lot of ways, the 2024 legislative elections didn't really do a whole lot. In 2023, Democrats gained a chamber. They flipped the Virginia House of Delegates. Before, Republicans had a 52-48 majority, but now they are in a 51-49 majority, 51-49 minority. They flipped it in 2021 when Glenn Youngkin won on his coattails, but people are getting frustrated with what happened with Glenn Youngkin, so it makes sense that as to, what happened there. That makes sense. 2022, the reason why 2022 is borderline, almost like a blue wave, was because the Republicans lost 5 chambers, although one of them is like this weird coalition that Alaska has, which, also happens there, so we're not going to really talk about, but they still lost 4 chambers of Democrats. The Minnesota Senate, the Michigan Senate, the Michigan House, and the Pennsylvania House. The Michigan House, Republicans would get back in 2024, but the rest of it still stands. In Minnesota, the Senate, load. In Minnesota, the Senate, before it was 34-31 for the Republicans, and now it's 34-33 for the Democrats. And we already know what happened in Michigan. In Michigan, in the House of Reps. In Michigan, in the Senate, however, we saw it go from 22-16 for the Republicans to 20-18 for the Democrats. And in Pennsylvania, we saw the House flip from 113-90 for the Republicans to 102-101 in favor of the Democrats. There was a special election, but yeah. So, and again, in terms of this, in terms of gubernatorial elections, Democrats netted 2 seats, but they really kind of broke even because Maryland and Massachusetts both had Democratic supermajorities beforehand, and they were pretty much guarantees to flip. Democrats flipped Arizona, Republicans gained Nevada, and they did flip the House, but only by flipping 9 seats. The Democrats gained a seat in the Senate. It really is the legislative elections, in my opinion, that make it why Democrats got more out of the 2022 elections than Republicans. And note Vermont, which again still had that Republican governor, but now a supermajority was reestablished in the Vermont House, which gives them, veto power over the Democrats, over the Republican governor, which they did not have before. And just so you know, in case you're wondering about the Vermont governorship, because I'm going to keep mentioning this a lot, I'll show you later how long it's been there. 2021, the Virginia House, the Virginia House of Delegates flips 55-45 for Democrats, now 52-48 in favor of the Republicans. They made huge gains on the coattails of Glenn Youngkin. Flipping the governorship, and they reflipped the House of Delegates. And Speaking of which, for governor elections, for governor elections for Vermont, just so you know, it was Republican. Ever since 2016, 2014 was the last time Democrats got the governorship of Vermont. Just like I pointed out. 2020 legislative elections, Republicans made 2 gains. So, again, it's kind of interesting to see how they're always floating around this zone. And if this could load, I would really appreciate it. So, despite Biden, gaining the presidency and gaining a trifecta, Republicans flipped New Hampshire in both the Senate and the House to gain a trifecta, because you could see on the maps how New Hampshire was also under Republican governorship. And of course, there's no Wikipedia article for the Senate flipping, but for the House flipping, 234 to 166 before, but then it became 213 to 187 in favor of the Republicans. And yeah. So that was 2020. 2019, we saw the Democrats flip both the Virginia Senate and the Virginia House. In Virginia, before it was 21-19, and then it became 21-19 for the Democrats. And the House of Delegates were 51-49 Republicans and 55-45 Democrats. 2018 was really devastating for the Republicans. I can't even go through them all, but Colorado, New York, Connecticut, New Hampshire, Maine all flip blue for the Senate. And the houses in Minnesota, New Hampshire flip. New Hampshire they get back, but all the others that they wouldn't. Now, technically, Connecticut went from an 18-18 tie to a 23-13 Democratic advantage. So technically, Connecticut, was never actually under Republican control, but still. So it was pretty devastating what happened there for the Republicans in 2018. They lost a lot of power, a lot of which they never gained back. 2017 is weird because Washington, they actually flipped, despite you think that Washington doesn't actually have elections, but there was a special election in the 45th district where Dino Rossi, a Republican, was left vacant after October 2016. He was appointed to the seat, and but then, then there was a whole election, and then the Democrats flipped the seat to Democrat, and thus giving the Democrats the majority. So that was weird. 2016, we see the coalition actually gain power in both Washington and in Alaska. Or they retain control in Alaska, but they gain in Washington, they gain control in Alaska. So that actually means both Republicans and Democrats technically lost the chamber. Oh wait, no. A coalition gained control. Oh, a split body was formed in Connecticut. That's what happened. So Republicans gained the Senates in Minnesota and Iowa. Oh, and another coalition was formed in New York. And they gained the Kentucky House of Representatives, which just feels really weird to me. How even before 2016, how in Kentucky, Democrats previously had the House, and that was no more, as they lost 18 seats. But Nevada House, Nevada Senate, New Mexico Senate, they all flip blue. And back here, you can see Republicans had 68 chambers, and after there was 66, so there were points where the Republicans were really dominating in terms of chambers, and now they're down to 57, which I also find to be very interesting. Of course, they were 57 before 2014. Again, Nevada, Colorado, Virginia, West Virginia, New York, Maine, the Senate's all flip red. And the House of Representatives flip red, Nevada, New Mexico, Minnesota, West Virginia, New Hampshire. So technically, the gains that the Republicans made in 2014, we can say that effectively they've all been erased, although it's awkward the way that you count it. This is 2013, 2012, again, Democrats made gains. 2011, not a whole lot, though the Mississippi House and Virginia Senate do flip. 2010, so this is the thing, Republicans gained 20 chambers. So even though we might say that even in the biggest of blue waves, Democrats still generally have more control of these chambers. Before 2010, this wasn't the case. They made huge gains. We can't even go through all the gains that the Republicans made in 2010. But before this, Democrats actually had 61 chambers. They had 61 chambers before this. It was crazy. And it wasn't even because of 2008, because the gains they made in 2008 were relatively modest. The Republicans gained the Senates of Montana, Oklahoma, and Tennessee. Only Nevada and New York flipped blue. The reason why they gained seats was because they flipped the houses of Montana, Wisconsin, Ohio, and Delaware. But it wasn't even that. Obviously, 2007 wasn't kind for the Democrats with the Mississippi and Virginia Senates flipping to the Democratic Party. But, a lot of this was 2006 because Republicans had 50 chambers before 2006, and obviously they lost 9 chambers. But even in 2005, it was close and contentious. Because, again, even though 2004 was Bush won and they made, big gains, they gained 4 Senate seats and they did gain some seats in the House too, the governorships was pretty much a wash. But it's like, in the legislative chambers, Republicans really didn't do well. But you also have to understand how, it was easier in a way for Democrats to have chambers back in the day, because a lot of these big southern states had Democratic Congresses back then. It was it's interesting to look at some of these maps back in the day and notice how much control Democrats had in areas where now Republicans have control, and that's what I think it's getting at here. Obviously, 2017, when they had 2/3 of the chambers, was the peak, and the Republicans are in one of the worst positions that they've been in a while, but they're in a much better position now because of the political polarization of the United States. The same thing when we look at the governor elections, which thankfully Jackson Jude will let me slide through on legislative elections. You look at the governor's elections and it's 27-23, which is what it was, after 2023, and then you see 26-24 after 22, and then 28-22 after 21, 27-23 after 2020, and then 26-24 after 2019, 27-23 after 2018, and then before that it was 33-16, and obviously that's a huge chunk that they had, but you could see how obviously Republicans have dominated the government in recent years, and now it might seem like the worst position that they've been in a very long time. Really, the 26-24, when it was like that, was the worst that it really was, since before 2010, and now that even though it's 27-23, that doesn't really change a whole lot in my opinion, but but like 2009, flipping both Virginia and New Jersey still only made it 26-24. And you just look at what the results were. It's like after 2006, Democrats had a majority, and it's consistently always always around 50-50-ish after these elections took place, and Republicans. I mean, I get that in the late 90s they had more power, but for a while it's been where governorships, more often than not, Democrats had more of them. Though, how the hell did Republicans gain 8 governorships in 1986? I'll never understand that. How Republicans gained governorships that many governorships in 86. But yeah, you could see on this map as to how Democrats have dominated for a while, and it's only been recently. So it's like, yeah.